Welcome to Saturday's Warrior, the channel where we talk all things BYU, Big 12, conference realignment, and that is what we're going to be discussing today, the latest in realignment, which for once has absolutely nothing to do with the ACC. We are looking at Conference USA with the addition of Missouri State to the ranks, coming up from the FCS. And as I went in to update my trusty map and add another school on there, it got me thinking as I was looking at all these group of five maps that what a jumbled mess it is, especially in the East and Southeast, where you've got the American, Conference USA, the Sun Belt Conference, all overlapping in basically the same geographic footprint. And many of these schools having changed between these conferences, some having been, I think, in all three of these conferences at some point. And it's just a mess. It's hard to remember which teams or which schools are even in some of these conferences. It gets very confusing. So I started thinking, I've got this map open. Why don't I try to take a crack at reorganizing the group of five conferences so that they make more sense? And this is very similar to the proposal that Conference USA made a few years ago when the writing was on the wall for them, when they got picked apart because the American and Sun Belt had to reorganize because of all the dominoes that fell because of Texas and OU leaving, and you know the story from there. So they made the proposal to both the American and Sun Belt, said, hey, let's reorganize, let's be more geographic. That's going to put less of a burden on each of our conferences. And the other two really had no incentive to, even though the American, who had, I think for a while, been pretty widely thought of as the top group of five conference, had really been picked apart and is nowhere near, I think, the level that it was at, was still sitting in pretty good shape compared to Conference USA. And same with the Sun Belt. They used to be, I think, at the bottom of the group of five, and they've really elevated their brand and kind of putting forward certainly not the best brand of football, but a fun and entertaining brand. And so neither conference really had the incentive to even listen to Conference USA. Now, look at them, they continue to add FCS schools to their ranks. And so, again, I went through and tried to say, hey, what if we did regionalize everything a little bit more, made all this a little bit cleaner and make sense? This was just a fun little thought exercise. But before we get in and look at that, please go ahead and give this video a like, subscribe to the channel if you like talking realignment. We do it a lot here, and it really helps us grow the channel. We appreciate it. So now let's go take a look at the map. All right, take two. Now, I already recorded this video, but it turned out my mic was turned off, so now I get to do it again. And before we get into the three conferences that we just mentioned at the top of the video, I want to get in and cover the Mountain West and the MAC, because there's a couple little tweaks we're going to make. So first of all, we know that the Pac-12 was recently stripped of its A5 status, meaning that it is now officially a group of five, or rather a group of six conference. But while they have a scheduling agreement with the Mountain West for now, it seems inevitable that unless either the Big 12 or the ACC comes in and swoops them up so that they can remain at a power conference level, that they will most likely have some sort of merger or reverse merger with the Mountain West. That could take various shapes, but it seems most likely that these 14 schools will be together, and I think that is the cleanest it can be. Then moving on to the MAC, this has been a very tight-knit conference, hasn't been too involved in all the hubbub with realignment, but they did recently add UMass, who's coming over as an independent, adding for the second time, I should add. But this puts them at 13 schools, so to round them out at 14, we give them the one remaining independent school, aside from Notre Dame, which is UConn. And to make this even cleaner, we'll say that they are accepting UConn for football only, so that UConn can leave its basketball as well as other schools in the Big East. And you could make the argument for a couple of schools like Temple or Marshall, who have previously been in the MAC, but since they left and UConn is looking for a home, I think that this is the cleanest solution. So that brings us to these other three conferences, the American, the Sun Belt, and Conference USA. And I'm sure you didn't need any convincing, but just looking at this graphic really highlights just how much these conferences overlap in footprint. And so I'm going to do my best to attempt to unjumble all this and put them into 3 cleaner, more geographic conferences. And because of the number we have, it'll have to be 1 conference of 12 and 2 conferences of 14. Conveniently enough for us, you can see this little space here that separates these 12 schools from the others. So that is going to be my first conference. And now the tricky part is dividing up these remaining 28 schools. But I'm trying to keep geography, but also rivalries intact here, and take all that into consideration. So I think the best way to divide it is along these lines. And even though you are separating some schools that are close, that is inevitable. Southern Miss has a history with these other schools here in the conference on that left side or western side. And then you also have the like South Alabama doesn't really have history with those schools. And likewise, you have Missouri State that is new to the FBS, does not really have a lot of history with most of these schools, whereas Memphis and Arkansas State, it was important to keep them together and keep that rivalry going. And so I think this is about as good as it's going to get. If I was missing something and I tore up some key rivalries that you feel need to stay together, please let me know in the comments. I mean, it's inevitable. Some rivalries will be separated, but I think this is pretty good when keeping all of that in mind. And now these 3 conferences could change their names. They could do whatever they wanted, but if I was going to keep these 3 conferences alive, I would say this one that extends up to the Northeast would have to be the American. That is, breaking away from the Big East. That is where its roots were. And so I think this makes the most sense. And then here in this middle conference, I would say that's the Sun Belt. You have some, I think, was it Georgia State or I think may have been one of the original schools there. I think Memphis, Western Kentucky, USF. So a lot of these schools I think have previously been in the Sun Belt. And so, and then just geographically, it makes sense for this to be the Sun Belt. And then lastly, that would mean that Conference USA is this one with the Texas and Louisiana mostly, and a little bit up in the Southwest. So there, I think this is a pretty good division of these 3 conferences if Conference USA would have gotten its wish. Obviously, some of these schools weren't in the mix then, but if they were to get their wish granted today, it would look something like this. And now I think this is a little bit easier to see them all separated with separate colors, and then adding them with all the group of 5 conferences, you can see just how much cleaner this whole map is, and it just makes so much more sense. It just really warms my soul looking at it. All right, so what do you think of my realigned group of 5 conferences? Obviously, a couple of these conferences have no incentive to do something like this, and so I can't see it happening. But what did you think of the makeup? Do you think that in a hypothetical world where we had a college football czar that could just make everything make sense, would these conferences be more aligned to what you would expect to see from geographical conferences? And also, please do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We appreciate it, and go Cougs!